Hello, this is Diana Thorne, and I am recording the lesson entitled The Lamp of the Body is the Eye. And we are studying Matthew 6:22 today. I'd like to recognize the student who drew the picture on the opening slide. This is one of the students from the children's home in Casa Alleluia, Guatemala. I did an art contest, and this student won one of the prizes as I picked his drawing for this presentation. Our text comes out of Matthew 6:19 to 24. Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. For wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Your eye is a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is good, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is bad, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So this particular scripture is really a metaphor which highlights the morals and ethics, comparing it to the eye and comparing it to the treasure that we all hold in our heart. Treasure in this sense is referring to values, valuables, treasured items that we hang on to, the things that are important to us. This scripture also compares heaven versus earth, light versus darkness, God versus money. And money is a symbol for coveting, desiring the things that are not important. For the love of money is the root of all evil, 1 Timothy 6:10 says. So let's look at the effects of light. Without light, there would be no sight. For example, if we are in a dark room, we stumble and fall, and we grope for something secure to hang on to. It's different than whenever we have some light. We move into a lighted area, we see more clearly. We can move around obstacles and locate whatever it is we're looking for. So looking again at verse 22, when your eye is good, your whole body is filled with light. What is light? Who is light? John 8:12 says, I am the light of the world. So when your eye is good, your whole body is filled with God. I think of Franklin Graham's shoebox ministry. That's an example of light. Your eye is good, your whole body is filled with God. Your whole body is filled with light. And you are projecting it out to others. When you're projecting God out to others, that is a symbol that your body is filled with light. God's light. In this slide, we want to look at physical sight versus spiritual sight and do a comparison. When we think of physical sight and we get our eyes tested, our physical eyes allow us to see what's visible. We have sight. We can see something that's real. Whereas with our spiritual eyes, when we see with our spiritual eyes, we see the invisible. We perceive beyond what is actually tangible. We see the intent. We see clearly the um, what is intended for the outcome. And so it's a perception rather than actually feasting our eyes on something. It's a perception of the mind. Our eyes and our heart are connected. The process of seeing is intimately connected to the heart. This verse that we are studying says, wherever your treasure is, wherever your values are, wherever what's important to you is, there the desires of your heart will be also. So it's comparing throughout this verse, what we're seeing with our eyes is compared to the desires of our heart, indicating that our eyes and our heart are connected. Now, there are several more scriptures which indicate that our eyes and our heart are connected, and that someone's eyes shows their inner character. You can look into someone's eyes and you can read their heart. I'm sure you've heard the eyes are the windows to the soul. Well, the Bible shows that our heart guides our eyes. Proverbs 23:26 says, "My son, give me your heart, and let your eyes observe my ways." See, if we give him our heart, then our eyes are going to observe the ways of God. We're going to follow his ways. Psalm 131 says, verse 1, "Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty." So you can look at someone's eyes and see if they're proud. You can see if they're humble. You can see it in their eyes. Lamentations 2:11 says, "I've cried until the tears no longer come. My heart is broken." Lamentations 3:51 says, "My eyes bring me grief." So our eyes reflects our emotions. Our eyes reflects how we feel. And those feelings come from our heart. Therefore, our eyes and our heart are connected. So a question here is, can pain be a treasure? Well, you think of treasure many times as being something good. We value this good thing, or we value something that we prize. But can pain be a treasure? Can we say, I've worked too hard, I've gone through too much, I've experienced too many things to let this go. I'm going to hang on to this. Verse 21 says, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. So thinking about, can pain be a treasure or something that we value? Thinking of this, the child trauma statistics are continuing to grow. This is probably already outdated. But 26% of children in the United States will witness or experience a traumatic event before they turn 4 years old. 26%. 1 in 4 before they turn 4 is going to witness or experience a traumatic event. And in 1 year, children between the ages of 12 and 17, out of those 39% report that they witness violence. 17% report being a victim of physical assault, and 8% report being the victim of sexual assault. What treasures of the heart are we creating? Verse 23 says, when your eye is bad, your whole body is filled with darkness. And darkness is the absence of light. If we turn the lights off, we have dark. Light is gone. And the stats that we are looking at with children, what they are witnessing, they are filling their eyes with bad things. They're filling their eyes, and then their heart is changed. And their whole body can be filled with darkness and be absent from light unless there's someone that reaches out to give them some hope and some light. I came across this article Um, just this week, I could not believe kindergarten children were sodomizing each other and taking pictures on the school iPads. Now, where did they learn that in kindergarten? Somewhere, somehow, the innocence has been lost, that our kindergarten kids even know what sodomy is and how to take pictures on iPads inappropriately. Someone taught them that. And the gunman of the recent shooting in Florida, when we read the articles, we hear about how he was orphaned, how he had been expelled for fighting, and even this title says he was known for his dark personality. So the darkness was seen even by people who were not Christians. The darkness was shining out of him. That was what was in behind the eyes, darkness. And if you look at his eyes, you can see they are listless, they are void, and we're going to talk about in a little bit blindness. So we are affected by our environment. The things we see and perceive affects our whole being. If we perceive goodness, that's going to radiate outward from within our hearts and our minds. But if we see bad or evil and we linger on that evil or we're around it constantly, we can become so affected that what we see can actually get in our hearts and emanate from within and corrupt us and those around us. And that's what we see in these two articles, recent articles in the news this week. Now, the worst state of all is saying, I'm not that bad. I'm not as bad as the killer. I'm not as bad as the child that was performing sodomy and taking pictures. And, we're humans and we see these things according to the consequences. But verse 23 says, if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep, how great that darkness is. So we may have a light in it. We may think we have a light in us. But what we see in ourselves is actually darkness, or can be. So taking a look at these two pictures here, which one of these pictures displays true light? Or are they both true? It's very hard to tell. The answer is in 2 Corinthians 11:14, which says, I'm not surprised. Even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Remember, when your eye is bad, your whole body is filled with darkness. But if the light you think is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. So is the light that we think is light, is that actually Satan disguising himself as an angel of light? Let's talk about Satan's disguise. The great deception, deceiving us into thinking that this is light. We hear about enlightenment. We hear about things that sound good. Deception is making us think that we're living in the true light, when in fact we're living in the darkness of false light. So if he can deceive us with our eyes, he can corrupt our hearts and minds. And deception means the act of causing someone to accept something as true, when in fact it's really false. Now, thinking about our eyes, sight is one of the five senses. Satan starts with our eyes. He gives power through our other senses. So he starts with our eyes, and he empowers what he's put in front of us by getting to our other senses. So think, for example, what are some of the examples of how Satan entices us with our eyes? And I have some here in this example. And then think about how he empowers that vision of sight with the other senses, the hearing, the tasting, smelling, touching, the other senses. Well, some examples are he puts things in front of us that focuses on ourself. You know, what's going to make me feel good? But really, they're temporal. They're temporary. They're of this world, the things that satisfy the flesh. He parades all manner of evil in front of us, worldly goods, things that appeal to our physical and materialistic impulses. Impulse. I want that. I want that. I want to be like that. I want to look like that. He brings darkness into our minds through the books we read, the movies we watch, the images we allow our eyes to linger upon. He deceives us into believing that these things are going to make us happy, fulfilled people. And when all the while what they're doing is they're robbing us from time to store up eternal treasure, and from our resources that we spend on things, on our time and our talents that we spend on things of this world that's just going to pass away and mean nothing as far as eternal life. Let's just take, for example, movies. How have movies been used to program us, just to deceive us? It starts with our eyes, right? We see it. It started out back in the 1800s, 1890s. 95 is when TV started. It started out in black and white. It was still, but then they moved to animation. Then they put sound in there, then color. Then, you know, we use our imagination, and then our emotions become involved. And then we were influenced by how we think, what we buy, how we spend our time. And now we're into this virtual reality where we can actually touch things and smell things. And here's an example just from November that says virtual reality experiences actually trick your brain into believing, here's an example, that you're walking on a narrow beam above a city. And what it's doing is it's appealing to your senses, your sensory stimuli based on touch and smell is what this is. And I recently read where they have a virtual reality where it makes you believe that you are a tree from a little sprout, and then you grow up and you feel it touches you and pokes you, and you can feel yourself actually, it feels like you're growing into this big tree, and then you hear the power saw and someone's going to cut you down. And so you experience being a tree so real that you are fighting for the trees to never be cut down. So we are being controlled. We are being controlled more. You can see from the very beginning of time how we're becoming more and more controlled, and our senses is empowering. What the control of our senses is empowering the control. So the biblical reference, there is a biblical reference that says, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. So he is telling us in Hebrews 5:14 that we are to take our senses, use our senses, and exercise our senses just like any other muscle. And we're supposed to exercise our senses to discern what's good and what's evil. And I think that we are missing that part in many day-to-day things that we are faced with. Our eyes are the entrance to our hearts and our minds. What we see affects our body physically and our soul spiritually. Let's just take a look at the eye by itself. The eye is a specialized light-sensitive sensory structure. This is a definition of an eye. It's the image-forming organ of sight, the faculty of intellectual or aesthetic perception or appreciation. That's the Webster Dictionary definition of eye. The eye works like a camera. The light of an observed object passes through the lens and makes its imprint on photosensitive film or a memory chip. So I had another little picture of how, the picture of the tree comes into the eye, and it also comes into the camera. Also, the brain works like a computer memory chip. So as this image comes through the lens of the camera and through the sensors and the filters, it's saved on a chip and then displayed on a screen. The brain here works like a computer memory chip. So back to understanding the physical, it's important that we understand the physical, how the physical eye works, so that we can understand how the spiritual eye works, because they are parallel. So let's break down how the eye works. When a human looks at an object, light from the object enters the eyes, and light goes through the cornea, which is like the front door. Now I've given you a chart with the eye on it, and if you want to label your chart as we go through this series on the eye, you can label your chart. All right, so the cornea serves as the front door. The light then travels through the pupil, which is like the second door. Now the pupil gets larger, it dilates when there is little light, and smaller when there is when there's little light. When there's more light. I'm sorry, that's a mistake on there. When there's more light. So when you go to the get an optometric observation, and you are given some kind of test in your eye, they want to test your pupil, you are dilated, and it's very hard to see whenever there's a lot of light. If the sun's out and they've dilated your eyes, you can't hardly see. So you have to wait until the iris can control it against the medication to move it back to the proper position. So the iris is what limits the diameter and the size of the pupil. Also, the iris determines the color of your eye. So the cornea is the front door, the pupil is the second door, and then your iris sets the limits on the size and the diameter of the pupil, and also determines the color of the eye. And then the light travels back to the lens, and the lens puts the light into focus. And what it does is it projects in an inverted image at the back of the eye on what's called the retina. So for example, if you're looking at, we're looking at a lady here, what actually comes back to your retina is an upside down lady. It's an inverted image that comes back to your retina. So whatever your eye sees, it takes it and flips it backwards and brings it into the retina. And now what the retina does, it forms the visual image and translates the light from the image into electrical impulses. So it takes that image and turns it into electricity. You've heard of shocking people's heart. Our heart has electricity as well. It's amazing the electrical impulses that is in our body. Now there are rods and cones along the retina there, and that helps provide navigation when the light's changing. For example, it helps us see in the dark. Rods help us detect changes in light, and cones allow us to see the different colors. We have, on average, each person has 100 million rods in their eye. 100 million. And 6 million cones to help the retina process all the colors and all the light that comes through the image, the object, into our eye. And once the eye captures the light and the data, it sends the light and the data to the brain via the optic nerve, where the image is then corrected. It's brought back into correction. So the rods and the cones help that correction as it's navigating the light and the color. It helps when it sends it through the optic nerve. That data helps turn that image back around to the way it actually is. You've heard of fiber optics. Well, that's where fiber optics, the same um, uh, optics in our eyes, is on the same theory. Fiber optics is the science of transmitting data. We know we're transmitting data from the fiber in our the optical nerve in our brain, or from the eye to the brain. And fiber optics is the science of transmitting data, voice, and images by the passage of light through thin, transparent fibers. So we're all connected on the internet, fiber optic. Now the brain takes the light and the data and it analyzes what we see, and in a split second, the brain can interpret that, and it justifies what our heart feels. So if our heart is feeling sad, in a split second, it can take what we've just seen and turn it into something sad. Our thoughts, our emotions, changes in our physical body, and then we act upon what we've just seen and how it's compared to our heart, because our eyes and our heart are connected. The amount of light changes our perception. For example, the sunlight changes throughout the day, all up until the night. So look at this tree. You know, the sun comes up, the tree is green. Sun goes down, the tree is dark blue or black. Did the tree change? No. The appearance changed. What changed the appearance? The amount of light changes how we perceive that tree. So let's take a look at this picture. What would happen to your eyes if you stared at this continuously? I know when I stare at it, it seems like the dots are moving. Like the white dots become black and the black become white. And that's just from looking at it for a few seconds. I can't imagine what it would be like if I looked at it continuously. Well, what happens is our eyes, our retina, gets tired very easily. And when we stare at something for longer than a few seconds, we have an after image. So we saw the black right beside the white, and the white becomes the black, and the black becomes the white. And so the chemicals in our retina are starting to deplete at that point, and the cones begin sending incorrect information to our brains that doesn't know any different. It just takes the information that it gets from the cones and the retina. And so in order to get your vision back, you have to close your eyes to readjust to it. So this is called retinal fatigue. What are other causes of eye tiredness? Is what it is. Your eyes become tired. Some of the other causes is age. It slows our eyes down. Our life experiences, you know, whatever we've been through in life. We could have had an injury, or we could have seen something over and over and over. Stress, disease, medications, overstimulation of too much noise, too much flashing lights, strobe lights. The beliefs and the teachings can actually cause our eyes, oh, I've seen that before. I've heard that before. Oh, yes, I've seen that all my life. Poor lighting can cause our eyes to get tired. And our environment, you know, I've lived with it all my life. So how do these things that makes our physical eyes tired, how would it make our spiritual eyes tired? For example, how would age affect our spiritual sight? Well, that could be, for an example, well, I've heard that in church all my life. I've heard that preached forever. That's probably really not going to happen. You know, so we become a scoffer and a mocker because of our age. We've heard it for so many years. So remember I told you that the eye works like a camera. You know, everything is stored on that memory chip in your camera. Everything is stored in our mind and our memory. How does the brain work like a memory chip? Well, we talked about it converts the light to electrical impulses, and the images then are formed are saved in our memory. So the electrical impulses in our memory Actually, that is the image. That's electrical impulses. Somebody asked Billy Graham in 2016, um, does God not only know everything we've ever done, but even everything we've ever thought? I hope not, because I'd really be embarrassed if anyone, including God, knew what goes on in my mind sometimes. TM. And Billy Graham answered, God knows absolutely everything about us, not only what we do, but also what we think. The psalmist in Psalm 139:2 says, you know, when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You know everything. You know when I sit, you know when I rise up, you perceive my thoughts from afar. Well, recently we've just learned in March, just this month, artificial intelligence can now reconstruct those electrical impulses in your brain, and they can produce whatever you see by reading a brain scan. So whatever it is you're looking at is now available on a brain scan. It's kind of like a memory chip. You have all these pictures, all this visual in your brain, and you can only imagine where that's going to go once that starts being used. So what are we looking at? What is affecting our environment? What effect is our environment having on society, on our kids? What effect of what they're seeing in front of them, what they're watching, what they're looking at, what they're doing, what they're playing with, what they're modeling after? What is that affecting? How is that affecting our society? Now, the spiritual side of this, Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And Ephesians 1:1 says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he's called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people. The eyes of your heart. So your heart is, once again, remember, spiritual sight. Psalm 119:18 says, open my eyes to the wonderful truths in your instructions. So again, spiritual understanding comes with having spiritual insight and knowing that our eyes are the doorway to our brain, our mind, our memory, our thoughts. Our eyes are displaying the depths of our souls, but our hearts are the controller of our eyes. We guard our hearts and our minds when we guard our eyes. When we change our focus of the eyes, we can also change our heart when we change what we're focusing on. So that part of that verse that says the lamp of the body is the eye. What is a lamp? Well, Psalm 119:105 says, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. The lamp of the body is the eye. So the lamp, the eye, provides light to our mind to dispel the darkness in our heart. For you are my lamp, O Lord, and the Lord illuminates my darkness. 2 Samuel 22:29. What happens when darkness is illuminated? Well, when darkness is illuminated, that means the light comes in and takes over. The Lord illuminates. Illumines my darkness. I'm not saying the word right. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching is light, and reproofs for discipline are the way of life. Proverbs 6:23. Satan tempts all of us. Even Jesus was tempted. So our heart is connected to our eye, and then remember the door of the eye. He puts in front of that first door all these temptations that appeal to our senses and our flesh. Well, we can dispel the darkness of the world. We can learn to control that second door, the light, with light, because light is the word. Jesus told him, "Go, Satan, for it's written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." So Jesus used the word. The word is light. So when he comes through the front door, we confront him at the second door with the word, and that light will dispel the darkness that just came through the front door. However, if we don't use the word to dispel, we've accepted his offer, and we become deceived. We become blind. 2 Timothy 2:22, 25, and 26 says, "Run from anything that stimulates your youthful lust. Instead, pursue righteous living, faithfulness, love, and peace. Enjoy the companionship of those who call on the Lord with pure hearts." See, it's very important who we have around us. It's very important who we have companionship with. Perhaps God will change those people's hearts and they'll learn the truth. Then they'll come to their senses and escape from the devil's trap, for they have been held captive by him to do whatever he wants. So once he gets a hold of your eyes and blinds your eyes, he then has the access to your heart. When we are deceived, he controls our thoughts and our actions, and ultimately changes our hearts. He has direct access to our hearts when he gets past the front door. And once we have our heart changed, then our treasure, or what we value, changes. We don't value the word anymore, or we don't value the good things, which produces an eyesight change, which then produces our thoughts and our actions, and our mind changes. Remember, when your eye is good, your whole body's filled with light. So we have to watch what changes our heart. So how can we train our eyes for the highway of life? It's just like any other muscle. If we don't train our eyes like we train our other muscles, they get weak. They don't function. For example, before you learn to drive, your eyes did not have to worry about anything more than walking. But once you get behind the wheel, you suddenly have to learn how to have cars passing you, how to adjust for the brakes. You can imagine how race car drivers and fighters, how fast their eyes need to work. So we need to train our eyes to keep us safe. And the way we train our eyes, our spiritual eyes, is to spend time in the Word. Ask the Lord to open our eyes and to exercise spiritual senses, the spiritual senses, where he says we need to control our senses through our what we allow in to transform our heart. Just an interesting fact, in color deficiency, color blindness, 1 in 13 men have color blindness, whereas 1 in 300 women have color blindness. So that is the end. If you have any questions, you can email me those questions. Thank you for listening, and I pray that God's richest blessings will be upon you.